Chapter 6. Juan Fernandez. We continued sailing along with a fair wind and fine weather until Tuesday, November 25th, when at daylight we saw the island of Juan Fernandez directly ahead, rising like a deep blue cloud out of the sea. We were then probably nearly 70 miles from it. So high and so blue did it appear that I mistook it for a cloud resting over the island, and looked for the island under it, until I gradually turned to a deader and greener color, and I could mark the inequalities upon its surface. At length we could distinguish trees and rocks, and by the afternoon this beautiful island lay fairly before us. We directed our course to the only harbor. Arriving at the entrance soon after sundown, we found a Chilean man-of-war brig, the only vessel coming out. She hailed us, and an officer on board, whom we supposed to be an American, advised us to run in before night, and said that they were bound to Valparaiso. We ran immediately for the anchorage, but owing to the winds which drew about the mountains and came to us from different points of the compass, we did not come to an anchor until nearly midnight. We were then divided into 3 watches, and thus stood out the remainder of the night. I was called on deck to stand by my watch at about 3 in the morning, and I shall never forget the peculiar sensation which I experienced on finding myself once more surrounded by land, feeling the night breeze coming from offshore, and hearing the frogs and crickets. The mountains seemed almost to hang over us, and apparently over the very heart of them came out at regular intervals a loud echoing sound, which affected me as hardly human. The mate, who had been there before, told us it was the alerta of the Chilean soldiers, who were stationed over some convicts confined in caves nearly halfway up the mountains. When all hands were called, it was nearly sunrise. Between that time and breakfast, although quite busy and bored in getting up water casks, etc., I had a good view of the objects about me. The harbor was nearly landlocked. At the head of it was a landing, protected by a small breakwater of stones, upon which 2 large boats were hauled up, with a sentry standing over them. Near this was a variety of huts and cottages, nearly 100 in number, the best of them built of mud or unburnt clay, and whitewashed, but the greater part Robinson Crusoe-like, only of posts and branches of trees. The governor's house was the most conspicuous, being large, with gated windows, plastered walls, and roof of red tiles. Near it was a small chapel distinguished by a cross, and a long, low, brown-looking building surrounded by something like a palisade, from which an old and dingy-looking Chilean flag was flying. This, of course, was dignified by the title of Presidio. A sentinel was stationed at the chapel, another at the governor's house, and a few soldiers armed with bayonets, looking rather ragged with shoes cut at the toes, were strolling about among the houses, or waiting at the landing place for a boat to come ashore. The mountains were high, but not overhanging as they appeared to be by starlight. They seemed to bear off towards the center of the island, and were green and well wooded, with some large and exceedingly fertile valleys, with mule tracks leading to different parts of the island. I cannot forget how Stimson and I got the laugh of the crew upon us by our eagerness to get on shore. The captain having ordered the quarter boat to be lowered, we both, thinking that it was going ashore, sprang down into the forecastle, and filled our jackets with pockets full of tobacco, to barter with the people ashore. When the officer called for our hands in the boat, we nearly broke our necks in our haste to be first over the side. We had the pleasure of pulling ahead of the brig with a tow line for half an hour, and coming on board again to be laughed by the crew, who had seen our maneuver. After breakfast, the second mate was ordered ashore with 5 hands to fill the water casks. To my joy, I was among the number. We pulled ashore with empty casks, and here again fortune favored me, for the water was too thick and muddy to be put into the casks, and the governor had sent me up the heat of the stream to clear it out for us, which gave us nearly 2 hours of leisure. This leisure we employed in wandering about among the houses, and eating a little fruit which was offered to us. Ground apples, melons, grapes, strawberries of an enormous size, and cherries abounded here. The soldiers were miserably clad, and asked with some interest whether we had shoes to sell on board. I doubt very much if they had the means of buying them. They were very eager to get tobacco, for which they gave shells, fruit, etc. Knives were also in demand, but we were forbidden by the governor to let anyone have them, and he told us that all the people there, except the soldiers and a few officers, were convicts sent from Valparaiso, and that it was necessary to keep all weapons from their hands. The island had been used as a penal colony for nearly 2 years. The governor, an Englishman who had entered the Chilean navy, with a priest, half a dozen taskmasters, and a body of soldiers, were stationed there to keep them in order. This was no easy task, and only a few months before our arrival a few of them had stolen a boat at night, boarded a brig lying in the harbor, sent the captain and crew ashore in their boat, and gone off to sea. We were informed of this, and loaded our arms and kept strict watch on board through the night, and were careful not to let the convicts get our knives from us when on shore. The worst part of the convicts, I found, were locked up under sentry in caves dug into the side of the mountains, nearly halfway up, with mule tracks leading to them, whence they were taken by day and set to work building an aqueduct, a wharf, and other public works. The rest lived in houses which they put up for themselves, and their families with them, and seemed to me to be the laziest people on the face of the earth. Having filled our casks, we returned on board. Soon after, the governor, dressed in uniform like that of an American militia officer, the padre, in dress of gray friars, and the captain, with big whiskers and dirty regimentals, came on board to dine. While at dinner, a large ship appeared in the offing, and soon afterwards we saw a light boat pulling into the harbor. The ship lay off and on, and a boat came alongside of us, and put on board the captain, a plain young Quaker, dressed all in brown. The ship was the Cortes, whaleman of New Bedford, and had put in to see if there were any vessels from round the Horn, and to hear the latest news from America. A small boat which came from the shore to take away the governor and quite brought as a present to the crew a large pail of milk, a few shells, and a block of sandalwood. The milk, which was the first we had tasted since leaving Boston, was soon dispatched. A piece of the sandalwood I obtained, and learned that it grew on the hills of the center of the island. About an hour before sundown, having stowed out water casks, we began getting under way. It was bright starlight when we were clear off the bay, and the lofty island lay behind us in its still beauty. I gave a parting look and bade farewell to the most romantic spot on earth that my eyes had ever seen. I did then, and have ever seen, felt an attachment for that island. I was partly, no doubt, it was partly no doubt from its having been the first land I had seen since leaving home, and still more from the associations which everyone has connected with it in his childhood from reading Robinson Crusoe. Thursday, November 27. Upon coming on deck in the morning, we were again upon the wide Pacific and saw no more land until we arrived upon the western coast of the great continent of America. We caught the southeast trades and ran before them for nearly 3 weeks without so much as altering a sail or bracing a yard. The captain took advantage of this fine weather to get the vessel in order for coming up upon the coast. The carpenter was employed in fitting up a part of the steerage into a trade room. For our cargo, we now learned, was not to be landed, but to be sold by retail on board. This trade room was built for the samples and the lighter goods to be kept in, and as a place for the general business. In the meantime, we were employed in working upon the rigging. Everything was set up top, and the lower rigging rattled up. An abundance of spun yarn and seizing stuff made. And finally the whole standing rigging, fore and aft, was tarred down. It was my first essay at the latter business, and I had enough of it, for nearly all of it came upon my friend Stimson and myself. The men were needed at the other work, and Henry Milas, the other young man who came out with us before the mast, was laid up the rheumatism in his feet, and the boy Sam was rather too young and small for the business. We put on short duck clothes, and taking a small bucket of tar and a bunch of oakum on our hands, went aloft and at main royal masthead, and the other at the fore, and began tarring down. This is an important operation, and is usually done about once in 6 months in vessels upon long voyages. It was done in our vessel several times afterwards, but by the whole crew at once, and finished off in a day. But this time it took several days. In this operation they always began at the masthead, and worked down. Tarring the stays is more difficult, and is done by an operation which the sailors called riding down. A long piece of rope is taken up the masthead from which the stay leads, and rove through a block. With the end of this a bowline is taken round the stay, into which a man gets with his bucket of tar and a bunch of oakum, the other end being fast on deck with someone to tend it. He is lowered down gradually, and tars the stay carefully as he goes. There he swings aloft twixt heaven and earth, and if the rope slips, breaks, or if is let go, or if the bowline slips, he falls overboard or breaks his neck on the deck. This, however, is a thing which never enters into a sailor's calculation. He only thinks of leaving no holidays. Place is not tarred, for in case he should, he would have to go over the whole again, or if dropping no tar upon deck, for then there would be a soft word in his ear from the mate. In this manner I tarred down all the headstays, but found the rigging about the jib booms, martingale, and spritsail yard, upon which I was afterwards put the hardest. Here, you have to hang on with your eyelids and tar with your hands. This dirty work could not last forever. On Saturday night, we finished it, scraped all the spots from the deck and rails, and that was all for more importance to us. Cleaned ourselves thoroughly, rolled up our tarry jacket and trousers, and laid them away for the next occasion. We put on our cleaned up clothes and had a good, comfortable sailor's Saturday night. The next day was pleasant, and indeed we had put one unpleasant Sunday during the whole voyage. That was off Cape Horn, we, where we could expect nothing better. On Monday we began painting and getting the vessel ready for port. We painted her with both inside and out, from the truck to the water's edge. The outside is painted by lowering stages over the side by rope, and on those we sat, with our brushes and paint pots by us, and our feet half the time in the water. This must be done, of course, on a smooth day when the vessel does not roll much. I remember very well being over the side painting in this way one fine afternoon, our vessel getting quietly along at the rate of four or 5 knots, and a pilot fish, the sure precursor of a shark, swimming alongside of us. The captain was leaning over the rail watching him, and we went quietly on with our work. On Friday, December 19th, we crossed the equator for the second time. We crossed the equator for the second time. I had a sense of incongruity with which all have when, for the first time, they find themselves living under an entire change of seasons or crossing the line under a burning sun in the midst of December. Thursday, December 25th. This day was Christmas, but it brought us no holiday. The only change was that we had a plum duff for dinner, and the crew quarreled with the steward because he did not give us our usual allowance of molasses to eat with it. He thought the plums would be a great substitute for the molasses, but we were not to be cheated out of our rights in that way. Such are the trifles which produce quarrels on shipboard. In fact, we had been too long from port. We were getting tired of one another, and we were in an irritable state, both forward and aft. Our fresh provisions were, of course, gone, and the captain had stopped our rice, so that we had nothing but salt beef and salt pork throughout the week, with the exception of a very small duff on Sunday. My messmate, Stimson, and I petitioned the captain for leaving the shift our berths from the steerage, where we had previously lived, into the forecastle. This, to our delight, was granted, and we turned into a bunk and messed with the crew forward. We now began to feel like sailors, which we never fully did when we were in the steerage. While there, however useful and active you may be, you are but a mongrel. You are immediately under the eye of the officers, cannot dance, sing, play, smoke, make a noise, or growl. You live with the steward, who is usually a go-between, and the crew never feel as though you were one of them. But if you live in the forecastle, you are as independent as a woodsayer's clerk, and are a sailor. You hear sailors talk, learn their ways, their peculiarities of feeling as well as speaking and acting. Moreover, you pick up a great deal of curious and useful information in seamen seamanship, ships, customs, foreign countries, etc., from their long yarns and equally long disputes. Another thing which you learn better in the forecastle than you can anywhere else is to make and mend clothes, and this is indispensable to sailors. A large part of their watches below they spend at this work, and here I learned the art myself, which stood me in so good stead afterwards. But to return to the state of the crew, upon our coming into the forecastle, there was some difficulty about the uniting of the allowances of bread, by which we thought we were to lose a few pounds. This set us into a ferment. The captain would not condescend to explain, and we went aft in a body with John, the Swede, the oldest and best sailor of the crew, for spokesman. The captain was walking the weather side of the quarterdeck, and seeing us coming aft, stopped short in his walk, and with a voice and look intended to annihilate us, called out, "Well, what the devil do you want now?" Whereupon we stated our grievances as respectfully as we could. But he broke in upon us, saying that we were getting fat and lazy, didn't have enough to do, and it was that which made us find fault. This provoked us. We began to give word for word. This would never answer. He clenched his fist, stamped and swore, and ordered us all forward, saying with oaths enough interspersed to send the words home. "Away with you! Go forward, every one of you! I'll haze you! You don't have enough to do. If you aren't careful, I'll make a hell of heaven. You've mistaken your man. I'm Frank Thompson, all the way from down east. I've been through the mill, ground and bolted, and come out a regular built down east Johnny cake. When it's hot, damn good. But when it's cold, damn sour and indigestible, and you'll find me so." The latter part of this harangue made a strong impression, and the down east Johnny cake became a byword for the rest of the voyage, and on the coast of California. One of his nicknames in the port was the Down East Johnny Cake. So much for our petition for the redress of grievances. The matter was, however, set right, for the mate, after allowing the captain due time to cool off, explained it to him, and at 8 we were all called off to hear another harangue, in which, of course, the whole blame of the misunderstanding was thrown upon us. Thus the affair blew over, but the irritation caused by it remained, and we never had peace or a good understanding again so long as the captain and crew remained together. We continued sailing along the beautiful temperate climate of the Pacific. We sailed well to the westward to have a full advantage of the northeast trades, and when we reached the latitude of Point Conception, where it's usual to make the land, we were several hundred miles to the westward of it. We immediately changed our course due east, and sailed in that direction for a number of days. At length we began to have to after dark, for fear of making the land at night. On a coast where there are no lighthouses, but in different charts. At daybreak on the morning of Tuesday, January 13th, 1835, we made the land at Point Conception, latitude 34 degrees, 32 degrees north, longitude 120 degrees, 30 degrees west. The port of Santa Barbara, to which we were bound, lying about 50 miles to the southward of this point. We continued sailing down the coast during the day and following night, and on the next morning, January 14th, we came to anchor in the spacious bay of Santa Barbara after a voyage of 150 days from Boston.